Hello everyone, this is Foster the People with Ben Burgess and Stefan Bertram. And today we're going to be talking about Marx and AI. I think this is slightly more interesting than usual because on Monday I applied to be a AI dog's body. I did an AI job assessment training thing, um, which first kind of tested my various flexibilities in the English language, including asking me to write a short story about a dancing octopus in Sam Bankman-Fried's office the day before they collapsed. It didn't say it said it gave the date, and then obviously you proved yourself a human by googling that and understanding the context. Um, and then a series of tests where I was given various AI prompts and I had to assess them.
Okay, so I've been trying to figure out from context because you used one of those British words that I are not in my vocabulary. What's a dog's body?
Oh right, yes, I think we've actually done Dog's Body before, but Dog's Body is like the lowest rung of whatever, the person that you get to do all the jobs which are left over.
Okay, gotcha.
I don't know if there's a clear equivalent in American English.
Yeah, not sure. Maybe the chat will think of one. I haven't, but yeah. Um,
But yeah, hopefully soon I'll be on the coal face of the thing that we'll be discussing today.
right. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, this is what went on the Substack today. Is the talk I gave at King's College a week after I saw you in person. For the thing at the University of London, and so originally, so Alfie Brown is at King's College now, and he and when he invited me to do this, like originally he had another idea which I wasn't that into, and then I was like, I don't know, can I just like talk about some Marx stuff, right? Like something from Capital, and and he was like, okay, but this is like the digital humanities program, so you should tie it in. And, and
You can't be talking about hammers the whole time.
yeah, exactly right. It can't just all be yards of linen and steam hammers. And I started thinking about that, and I realized that actually there is within some of the stuff that I'd recently been talking about with the Capital class that I thought might be an interesting tie-in here, which is thinking about what Marx writes in Capital in relation to the I don't know. It feels kind of ridiculous to use phrases like AI, industrial revolution, but whatever you want to call it, right? The sort of you know massive social
The Industrial Revolution.
yeah. The massive social ripple effects of the introduction of this technology that we're seeing right now, right? And kind of think about what Marx says in Capital in relationship to that, because I think that there are a couple of things in Capital that are sort of relevant in ways that might seem to point in different directions, but I think ultimately there's a pretty interesting view that you can extract from all of this. Even though, to be clear, I mean, Marx is like, as far as humanly possible from like seeing this coming, right? I mean, like he actually has this passage in chapter 15 on machinery where he says that like all technological advances are just like different ways of combining like a few basic physical processes, and then he like describes what the physical processes are. It's like, well, these are extremely basic, right? So like I think
Yeah, I always remember the bit in Capital where he like explicitly forbids the idea of there ever being fiat currency.
right. Yeah. It's kind of up there with that one in terms of Marx's L's predictively. That and yeah, it is the fiat currency one is really interesting because I mean, I think if you really wanted to, there is a way that you could reconcile a fair amount of what he says in the money thing with the Like,
The special commodity is funnily inked paper.
yeah. Well, or even just like electronic records, right? That's which is really what we're ultimately talking about. And
Yeah, I mean,
like,
banknotes, at least in the UK, are like incredibly complex commodities made in very peculiar ways, such that they can't be copied.
right, the actual banknotes are. I mean, it is true though that like, look, I mean, I was just in the UK. I think I paid for things with the funnily inked paper like twice the entire time, and one of those was like,
Yeah,
uh,
I don't know the last time I touched a piece of cash. Actually, no, I do remember. It
yeah,
was on a late night out.
yeah. I mean, it's like literally. I think that God, yeah, no, I actually no once, right? So I think like I had like a 10 pound note or something that was left over from a previous visit last year or something, and I had to, and I think that I used some of it to like buy some like I don't know, it's like some like festively roasted like almonds or something from a street vendor, and even he, I'll bet like I would be very unsurprised if I was like, oh, do you have a credit card reader? It's like, oh yeah, of course, right? And
I did learn today that interchange fees for debit cards are 5 times higher in the United States than they are in Europe, which
oh
doesn't
wow.
surprise me, but furthers the idea that the United States is like just like a scam end to end. It's just an entire, it's like 350 million people just nickeling and diming each other.
Yeah, I mean it is really striking that so many of our most pernicious billionaires in this country are people who came out of the PayPal mafia, right? That they made their initial money through like literally PayPal is just like a scheme to like extract trivial amounts of money from people from like making like small transactions.
Do you know what I'll be
So
paid on if I get the AI job?
PayPal, yeah. I mean, it's just, but it's like, yeah, it's like that. That's all PayPal is. It's like a money making enterprise. It's just like the like approximate equivalent of like a couch cleaning service that pocketed the pennies they found in the couch cushions.
Yeah.
So definitely goes to your like America's one big scam thesis, but yeah, I mean, so if you really wanted to, you could argue it's like okay, granted, the banknotes are kind of almost as beside the point as anything else at this point. So like, but you could argue that like even just the kind of like electronic records, it's like in a certain sense it's like not a commodity clearly, but he does say a few things in those first three chapters about how under particular circumstances commodities could have values even if they're not even if there's no producing process, right? So like there's no actual number of hours of labor time it takes to produce them, right? He gives the example of like speculative real estate,
Mm.
sales, and I think he has a couple other examples like this, right? So
Yeah,
say
and
once
also,
you,
I mean, we should also, assign him great honor because obviously he didn't go far enough in rejecting like money fetishism, but he was
yeah,
the guy
yeah,
that
yeah,
chose the right path. And amazingly, is much less of a money fetishist than like many present day people who obviously
right, right,
have only
right.
ever known fiat currency but still believe it has magical powers.
Totally right. Yeah. The whole thrust of those first three chapters is money isn't special, but he is still treating money as a commodity. And like there are a couple passages where he seems to pretty directly suggest that you couldn't have like pure fiat currency. So yes, right general directionality. And if you really wanted to be a fundamentalist about this, I think there are ways that you could like fit fiat currency into the like scheme that he gives for how he talks about money. But like, I also think like probably the game is not worth the candle there. Like, just like say like, okay, he's kind of wrong about that. Make your adjustments, right? But yeah, he says exactly return. But yeah, he says in the technology, the chapter on machinery, right? Like he has this line about how the screw and the inclined plane and these basic things, right? That it's like all of the technological advances are just, however disguised, or just ways of doing those basic functions. So of course, this is, I think, not a line that you likely would have written in the era of televisions and microwave ovens. Never mind global positioning satellites. Never mind AI increasingly taking over a lot of the job functions of like lawyers and etc. Right. So he certainly didn't see it coming. But there is a lot of the points he makes about automation in general uh, are clearly very relevant to thinking about the moment that we're in right now with AI taking over all these human functions. And also, some of what he says about the labor process in general strikes me as capturing something about why some of the functions of AI might be disturbing to us, right? And I think that because he's like, some of what he says just about labor is like a general human activity. And I think you can kind of put all this together, and I mean, just to kind of not bury the lead here, right? That think, okay, I mean, I think if you sort of put together all of Marx's views in Capital and like use it to think about the AI revolution, say, okay, well, um, the way automation plays out under capitalism is really good. Under socialism, is very bad, right? Under socialism, it could be very good. But like also, I think, we can go through the moves here, but I mean, it's like basically, I think we can, it's, I think that part of the advantage of moving towards socialism is precisely that, like, the further you can move in that direction, then the more we can make kind of conscious collective decisions about how we want to incorporate new technology, which doesn't mean like Luddite being Luddites about it, but it's like, I think it could potentially mean like, you know, yeah, look, there are, we need to kind of make decisions together about which things we think there's innate value in humans doing and which things we don't, right? And the things that there's no particular innate value in humans doing, it's just right now humans do it because like that's the only way we can get it done. Then beautiful, wonderful, right? We can automate that away, and under a social system where automation plays out, in a more humane way, that's all to the good, But then there could be other things that we think that there's like that there is maybe tremendous value in like still having done by humans, and those those ones we want to keep done by humans, right? Which is sort of a very simple-minded thing to say ultimately, right? But I mean, I think it is. I think it's very as simple-minded as that sounds, right? That like we kind of decide what has intrinsic value, and then we use that to decide what we want to have automated or what we want to stay in human hands, right? It's a like that's just clearly not what we're seeing right now, right? Because right now we're sort of under the sway of blind market forces that will tend to implement stuff indiscriminately, and it will also tend to, like, even the stuff that it would theoretically be good if it wasn't done by humans. If we're at the right level of abstraction, that sounds like a good thing, right? I mean, the way it plays out under capitalism is very bad because we have your people's livelihood is attached to their job, right? So if we make jobs redundant, right? That's bad for the human beings, right? Which is where Marx spends a lot of chapter 15, right? Because he has all these bourgeois economists that he's responding to who will sort of provide, like, who think that it's like a law of nature that that when like some jobs become redundant, that like that will always exactly be made up for, by
Right.
by new jobs elsewhere.
But also
And
conversely, that people seem to think that, when we get rid of the jobs, then we'll become more free and we'll have to work less.
totally, yeah. I mean, this is how the chapter starts with this little dig at John Stuart Mill, who has this line that where he's in his like book on political economy, where he's like, oh, it's kind of strange that the introduction of all this labor saving technology never actually seems to save any labor, right? It never seems to actually mean
And
that
then
people work.
it goes back to all the way to Aristotle saying the same thing.
Yeah, 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 exactly, right. So, yeah, who's yeah, Aristotle is like, it is funny actually. Somebody should go through and make a list of the people who Marx, like the authors Marx talks about in Capital, who actually get generally positive mentions, which would be a very short list, right? He's generally kind of hating on everybody he quotes, but
Yeah, I literally
but
can't think
like
of anyone but Aristotle. And I guess
yeah,
Engels, when he brings
yeah,
up like
yeah,
the working condition of the condition of the
yeah,
working
yeah.
class.
In England, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's like Aristotle, Engels, Ricardo about half the time,
Hmm.
and some like factory inspectors whose names we're not going to remember. That's it, right? Like that's I think that's more or less all. like, yeah, that's like so like yeah. I mean, I guess Ingalls is the only one who he brings up and never to disagree with him, right? Other than some factory inspectors with now names we're not going to remember. And then like yeah, Ricardo is very 50-50. It's like, he'll often be crediting him for like figuring out important things, but then be like, oh, but you missed this other massively important thing.
I guess Ricardo's his favorite more than Smith.
Yeah, yeah. Ricardo is his favorite bourgeois economist. Um, and then Aristotle is the one who, I mean, it's more critical, of course, than Engels, but
But obviously, he does the same thing we do now, where it's like, well, he did live in the third century BC, so what could he do?
yeah, exactly. Right. Like usually he's bringing up Aristotle to lavishly praise him. And when he brings up the obvious defects, like he always gives him he always gives him the product of the time pass.
Yeah, he was like,
So
he was like 1700 years ahead of his time. We can't diss him for not being 2100.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, so he quotes Aristotle when, Aristotle is saying, oh, if we if we could have like looms that would weave themselves, or we had like or we had machines to produce things that could like walk around of their own accord, like the contraptions of Daedalus, which I don't actually directly know anything about the Daedalus stuff, except that like Plato is also always referencing like this guy Daedalus supposedly making contraptions that walked around in their own power. So these guys love bringing that up as a metaphor for different things. But but yeah, if we had this, Aristotle said there would be no need for slaves because
Oh, he was Icarus's dad.
all right, interesting. So that is a new fact I just learned. Yeah, that's fun. But yeah, would there be no need for slaves or apprentices if we had like machines that could just make things? Because then like all the grunt work could just be done by the machines, right? Aristotle thinks.
And I mean, he's kind of right because the kind of apprentice system of the guilds and the slave system were both abolished by the bourgeois industrial revolution.
That's
They
true.
just then that
Yeah.
was replaced with freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's like, but yes, his assumption is, oh, then you wouldn't need like, you wouldn't need like humans at the bottom of society doing a bunch of hard degrading work because it could just be done by machines. And, Marx introducing him as he usually likes to introduce Aristotle as the greatest thinker of antiquity, has this passage where he's like, oh, these silly, so he also quotes Antipater, who's this like Roman era Greek poet, saying something very similar. And he says, oh, these silly pagans, right? They knew nothing of Christianity or modern civilization, and so they could perhaps accept the uh, bondage of one individual as a way of securing the human flourishing of another, but they couldn't even imagine how we do it, right? And his and of course what he's referring to is in Victorian England, this advanced, modern, enlightened, industrialized Christian country. Says it's like, yeah, we've introduced all these machines, but we don't actually use it to lighten anybody's workload, right? We just have some people working as hard as ever and some people thrown into utter destitution, because they lose their jobs. And he makes a lot of points about this that feel very contemporary, actually, right? So he says he says that, like, uh, I mean, it's okay. So one, he does have this technical economic argument that there's no particular guarantee that, like, the jobs created, the jobs destroyed, and the jobs created are always going to balance out. Says it could work out that way, right? But there's no guarantee of that. But then, more importantly, it says, look, even when it does happen that way, like, it's kind of crazy to talk about that as if this makes it all okay, right? Like,
Yes. Oh, I mean, your life as a peasant's being completely discolated, and eliminated. So you can go become a wage worker, and it's like, okay,
yeah, right. So it's like, oh, so you were fine, right? It's all good,
not
right?
nothing. Ben, nothing's changed.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's like, yeah. So you were, like, dislocated from your old craft, and you were on the edge of starvation for like 2 years, and then maybe you got a new job, right? So, like, so essentially you're okay, right? It's like, no, they're like, if I mean, he spends a lot of the chapter describing these, like, cycles of people being immiserated because their old job becomes redundant, and they're desperate. In 19th century Britain, maybe they starved to death. That happened more often than, and of course, in 21st century US or UK, unemployed workers aren't starving to death. Even post Reagan, post Thatcher, we have better welfare states than that. But like, there are those deaths of despair in, like, deindustrialized regions that will kill you just as dead as starvation, right? I mean, that you think about these like post-industrial towns that have like 40% continuing unemployment rate, and the, like, fentanyl overdoses are one of the leading causes of death. That, like, the death and destruction still happens, right? It just takes different forms. And the and just the chaos, right? The loss of personal stability of, like, of your means of livelihood are taken away, and then, like, and then you're thrown into the trash heap, and maybe you can crawl out of it again and get a new job. But I mean, that's very far from, even when that happens, that's very far from, like, no harm, no foul. And then that, like, oh, eventually, you got a steady income again. And he points out, again, sounding very contemporary, he says that it's not, even when new jobs are created, right? It says there's no guarantee that this helps the original victims, right? Because it says there's always a steady stream of new men, right? Which,
Humans do, in fact, get born and die.
yeah, exactly, right. This happens reliably enough that, like, I mean, if my favorite example of this is like, there's a debunk segment we did on the Michael Brooks show years ago, where he was talking about education and upward mobility, and we watched Barack Obama in one of his State of the Unions saying that the best anti-poverty program is a world-class education. Everybody claps. It's like, well, first of all, First problem with that is just as a matter of supply and demand. Like education and credentials give you an advantage in the labor market precisely insofar as most people don't have them,
Yeah,
right?
I mean that is like it's such like a common bit of bourgeois ideology that you just hear over and over and over again. Like it's nearly that's like kind of the liberal equivalent of when conservatives always like post a map showing that like most of the country in like land area voted for them.
Right. Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
I've seen that my entire life and it will never stop.
yeah. Yeah, exactly, right. And so that's the thing, right? Kilgore, in the chat is anticipating the point, right? That it's um, like when like all these coal mines were shutting down in the Obama years, like the big Obama administration solution was to sprinkle some technology training centers around Appalachia. And it's like, okay, so you're essentially telling these laid off coal miners to learn to code, which means like, all right, let's say you show up at one of these technology training centers and you do the thing, right? You learn the skills. Then it's like, okay, well, to Marx's point about the stream of new men, it's like, well, now as a middle-aged laid off coal miner, you're competing for these jobs with like 22-year-olds, with their fresh computer science degrees. Good luck with that, right? That's like that just it's that's a non-solution, right? And so yeah, under capitalism, automation is a horror show. And if anything, I mean, the interesting thing about the kinds of technological developments that are happening now is that it's a more evenly distributed horror show between different kinds of jobs than we've had in the past, right? So like we do have some applications of like AI stuff, related technology that are hitting like the kinds of jobs that we sort of conventionally expect to be hit by automation, right? So the
I
example I
mean,
talked.
guy that drives car is actually kind of a recent innovation as industrial capitalism goes, but
Yeah,
is kind of like a key working class job now.
yeah, exactly. Like truck drivers, right? I mean, that's the kind of like traditional working class job that it's sort of like it kind of fits the narrative in your head that this would be the kind of thing that'd be hit by automation. And so gave the example of something that just came through recently in California, right? Which, sorry, I was just smiling because I was trying to remember. I think this wasn't the one where when I turned in the article, the title I gave it was "Gavin Newsom is a piece of shit," and I guess that's too far even for Jacobins. So that is they gave it some much more boring title, but. But yeah, this might not have been that same article anyway. But the title I think that we end up going with for this Jacobin article was Gavin Newsom keeps throwing workers under the self-driving bus, and the context in that case was our super lib Democratic governor, um, who's occasionally bandied about as a possible Democratic nominee for president in the future.
Like because he's evil, basically. Like that's going to be like the appeal of him.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, I think the one that I wanted to call Gavin Newsom as a piece of shit was that like I just loved the coincidence of like within days he'd he had both one uh, done this like big performative lib victory lap because he'd instituted this like ethnic studies requirement, for like high schools. Um, but so it's like the opposite of like the red state anti-CRT thing. But like within days of that, he'd also vetoed an expansion of like financial aid for community college students that would have, of course, if we're playing this game, would have in fact disproportionately benefited non-white students, right? So it's like, yeah, you can, it's like, yeah, we're not actually going to help you pay for school, but like we can give you some like ethnic studies shit to like sleep through at the end of high school. Um, but yeah, in this case, though, the self-driving bus thing, he'd vetoed a law to that would have required there being like a human backup driver in self-driving trucks on California, highways. Uh, which of course vetoing it meant all kinds of massive truck driver job losses because like oh we can do without the human entirely, right? And just trust in the AI, navigation algorithms to avoid car crashes, and so yeah, that's like a very traditional sort of example. But the same year, right? We had sticking with California, right? We had the Hollywood strike, right, which was the writers and actors unions out at the same time, and a lot of that was about fear of AI, displacing a lot of those people's jobs, right? And so that second one is exactly the kind of thing we don't normally think of as like AI induced job loss, right? That like you know Hollywood screenwriters are exactly the kind of people that we do not think of or would not have thought of before a couple of years ago as like potential automation victims. And similarly, right, we've got like every 6 months, somebody will write one of these like AI is coming for doctors and lawyers jobs articles, which
I really love that you asked the AI about this, and it said actually AIs are innocent in this matter and will only take away the bad bits of your job.
exactly right. Which is why I thought it'd be much funnier to like do the screenshot of that rather than like the actual articles that's that helpful AI summary right at the top of the Google search. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It seems to have a conflict of interest here, and in declaring itself innocent. But I think that really what it says the AI assistant should read Capital because the because like when it says like oh don't worry we're only taking away the boring parts of your job as a doctorate lawyer, um like look, whether or not this reassurance is actually apt I think very much depends on whether you are a co-owner of the practice or just an employee, right?
Right,
Because
especially because I think, especially in the case of lawyers, like you become a lawyer in a practice or a partner or whatever by first doing those boring bits. And without those boring bits
exactly,
existing, it's a bit like,
exactly, yeah. I mean because it's like yeah there are lots of like low level lawyers, their whole job is doing the boring bits, and of course if they're not partners, right, they it's real easy to fire them, and so it's like yes then in that case AI may in fact make your job entirely redundant, right? And so you might in fact be thrown into unemployment because of this, right? And yeah, and actually, as with some of the Hollywood stuff, it becomes very unclear what the entrance system now looks like, right? Like what your like sort of apprenticeship looks like for these professions, right? Since that's like if you no longer have great big writers' rooms, that was like one of the issues in the Hollywood strike, or you no longer have you no longer have young lawyers doing these jobs for the first 10 years where they're basically just looking shit up. Uh, then yeah, that becomes very unclear.
yeah, and I
And
think especially in Hollywood, the kind of the threat both of AI writing and of kind of AI likeness is really bad because one of the biggest kind of critiques of Hollywood as kind of an artistic entity is like the sequel obsession. Kind of all the big movies now are sequels or continuations and so on. And AI likeness and AI writing is presumably most apt exactly to do that forever.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the thing it's best at is presumably the thing that we would hope that it would get past, Hollywood as a creative entity. But of course, it seems like the opposite will be the case.
yeah, right, exactly. And I also think, I mean, I didn't get into this there, but this is what somebody, Paul Simmons, pointed out in the Q&A at the King's College talk version of this, that like you
I like
have.
that it took you 2 weeks to put out this article when you're basically copy and pasting it from your own thing.
Well, yeah, I did. Yeah,
Or
yeah,
did
it
you not
is.
actually? Did you not have a? You like had to transcribe it, or
No, no, no. I did. I could mostly take this from my notes for the talk. I like edited it a little bit to make it work in this format, but no. The issue was that last weekend I literally didn't have
oh, you
my.
didn't have a computer?
uh, yeah, there you go.
We're almost an iPad kid last week.
Yeah, so I did have like when I was computerless, like my screen stopped working. It was like doing the it was doing like the computer version of like the dead TV fuzz,
Mm.
and so I took it into the Apple store, and I did still have like the Apple Care, so it wasn't that expensive to replace, but they didn't have the replacement display in stock, so I had to like leave it with them for a week, and
Did you have to drive to America to do that?
oh, I was actually already in America.
Right.
I've been because I actually just got back to Mexico like on
Actually, you posted on Facebook your second day back or something yesterday.
yeah. So I actually drove back on Thursday night. I had like Thanksgiving dinner with my extended family, and then
Oh right, yeah, of course.
you know
What's the sci-fi scene behind you?
that's just the screensaver from my Roku.
Very cool.
So yeah, yeah. I think there were like a few options, and I picked that one. But yeah,
It's cute.
it's um so yeah, I actually drove back on Thursday night after Thanksgiving because it was which was a good call because like traffic was nothing, right? I think at that point. But yeah, so I had been because I'd actually been out of Mexico for like a month because I was in the UK for like most of 2 weeks, and then I just stayed in LA for the 2 weeks since then, pretty much. So yeah, I was in. So I had to drop it off at the Apple store, and I could like jerry rig like a workaround for a lot of things with an iPad and a keyboard, but it was kind of delightfully random what the iCloud backup like actually backed up and what it didn't, and so the Word file with my notes from the King's College talk was not in the backup for some reason. So so yeah, I had. So yeah, so that was why like this was one of the many things that I wasn't able to do last weekend because to the theme of the day, right? I'm hopelessly dependent on all this technology, but yeah, in the in the Q&A, right? Like Paul had brought up this point that like I'll see like Cory Doctorow making about how one of the problems with generative AI, and this goes along with what I did mention in the essay, which is the Ted Chiang line about how one of the thing that it's been most successful in generating is lowered expectations.
Mm.
Uh, that like that there's this sort of like problem about the slop continually being reprocessed, right? Because if you're just sort of doing this like massive scan of all the stuff that's been written, and then then you're remixing that to to this just generic output, and then like that now becomes an increasingly big part of the big pot that your
Yeah.
process.
So when I was doing the AI assessment on Monday, there was two very interesting things. First was that the they were like desperate to avoid you like using AI to answer the questions. There
Yeah.
was like a dozen different warnings spaced throughout the thing, being like, "Don't use AI, don't use AI, don't use AI," and the whole thing existed to make sure you weren't an AI or a person using AI, which of course very very funny considering
Right.
what their
Consider
work
what it's
is.
for. Yeah.
But obviously, it's obvious why, because once an AI touches another AI and they get to talk to each other, they degenerate incredibly rapidly.
Right.
Also, it's the same questionnaire for everyone, or same assessment for everyone. And so a lot of the stuff when you would Google the question, because some of it required Googling, you're allowed to Google. Notably, AIs can't Google. Um, they were like the research results were polluted by people asking the questions to AIs, especially because one of the books they was discussing was asking about was quite obscure, and so most of the search results from that were produced by this AI assessment and people asking AIs how to do the AI assessment rather than anything actually do with the book.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, I think that one way of maybe looping back to the general Marx point about automation, right? Like, so one silly way of like thinking about the core of the issue, maybe going back to the John Stuart Mill thing, is to think about a show that is long before my time, but I still, for some reason, watched a lot of growing up, which is the Jetsons.
Mm.
Um, I mean, for whatever reason, there's some Jetsons VHSs that I must have spent some time with. So I can vividly remember a lot of that show. And for anybody who's not familiar, right, this was this late 20th century. Um, and I'm not even doing the cutesy thing where I'm calling the 1990s the late 20th century. Before that, right? Considerably before that. But it was this late 20th century animated sitcom that that's basically I think it first came out in the early 60s, maybe something like that. But the that's it's set in the future, so it's like probably supposed to be the 90s or something. I don't remember if they specified what year it was supposed to be set in, but it was set in the future. There are flying cars, there are robots, all that stuff, and it's just a pretty standard sitcom set in that world, uh, and um, and and of course the thing that's like so goofy about it, like looking back on it, is that it was it's like absolutely everything about the society it depicts is exactly the same as the society that produced it, except the technology is better, right?
Right.
Everything
I
else.
mean, obviously, the Flintstones is the inverse, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. The
Yeah.
Jetsons is just
They're
the
the
reverse
exact
the
same
reverse
social
Flintstones.
conditions in the Jetsons, kind of similar to 1950s America, and then in the fucking Flintstones.
Yeah, yeah, the Flintstones and the Jetsons are both versions of the 1950s in every single respect except the technology, right? That in the Flintstones, it's the Flintstones. It's that yeah, it's that like you know Eisenhower, Kennedy era America, but people are living in caves. But somehow it's like exactly the same, like socially it's precise, it's like 100% the same. And the Jetsons, it's that same American social conditions, except that you have flying cars and robots, right? And so you have, but it's like the economics are the same, the gender roles are the same, like everything is the same, um, except for the technology, which means that you have George Jetson as the like classic, post-war, middle America single breadwinner, with a job at the factory, and his wife Jane, stays home with his boy Elroy, and his daughter Judy, which they say all these people's names in the theme song, so I can remember them all. And their dog Astro. That's the other difference. For some reason, Astro can talk. I don't know if they ever explained that, but George works at the Sprocket factory. He works for this like very classic industrial capitalist kind of character, Mr. Spacely, and part of the gimmick, the joke, is that it's like automation has advanced so far that George does almost nothing at the Sprocket factory. Like, I couldn't find this when I was looking for YouTube clips to illustrate it, but I can distinctly remember watching Jetsons episodes where it was portrayed that like George literally showed up, pressed one button, and then, reclined for the rest of his shift, because that was all he still had to do, is press that one button. And I
Which
couldn't
is
find.
something that Gary Newsom fucking vetoed.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom. Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, that would be the equivalent. Maybe in this world they had the law. So it's like, okay, you still need the backup human operator, for the machine. Um, and
Yeah, or he just exists to press that button again
yeah,
at
yeah,
the needed time.
exactly. And yeah, the clip that I did find was George is complaining to Jane that like the schedule has gotten so hectic at the Sprocket factory that Mr. Spacely made him work a 2-hour shift.
Yeah.
Oh, and she's like, oh, does he think he's running a sweatshop? Right. So like that very appealing fantasy, of course, the problem with it, if you read Capital, is that it makes no sense given that you so clearly still have capitalist property relations in this world, right? That like, um, why would Mr. Spacely continue to pay George enough to support Jane, Elroy, Judy, and Astro, for pressing a single button, right? I mean, he wouldn't. If there'd been like before technology advanced to the point where this was the only work that still needed to be done by a human in this system, if there were 10,000 workers at the Sprocket plant, presumably he would just lay off 9,999 of them. And if George was the lucky one who got to keep his job, presumably he would run him ragged, like, going back and forth between different, factories where he pressed the one button, right? For, a shift that was just as long as whatever he started with, right? Like, whereas, if George and his fellow workers had to, seize control of the means of production, then they actually could democratically decide, maybe that they want to, could be that in some instances, the citizens of a socialist future might decide that they do actually want to capture productivity increases with increased consumption, right? So they want to, in that instance, work just as much as before or more. Marx suggests that at the end of chapter 17, right? But it could be that in other instances, they're like, no, we just want more free time, right? So,
Yeah, because that kind of thing where you press one button on your shift and then sit there the rest of the night actually sounds horrible.
yeah. Well, it's funny actually. There's a friend who I mentioned at the beginning of the essay, who he actually doesn't anymore, but he used to work at an auto plant, car factory in where I grew up in Michigan, and he's, and there was a point where it was like I was drinking with this guy and he was like, oh yeah, I listened to you and Chapo like all day on my headphones while I'm at work,
Yeah.
right? So if you were going through, if you were doing it on that plan, I guess maybe it wouldn't be too bad, but like physically, you'd still be stir crazy, right? Like it's like what, yeah.
They ever make explicit what Homer Simpson actually does with his day?
Homer, well, Homer is a nuclear safety inspector, and so uh,
He seems a bit sedentary to do that.
he does seem a bit sedentary. There are many suggestions over the course of the 10 or 15 episodes seasons of The Simpsons I watched before the quality started to deteriorate. And I'm not too familiar with the 100 seasons they've done since then, but there are many suggestions over the course of the show that he's not particularly good at his job. That
Yeah.
So it could be that a more competent safety inspector would be like doing more walking around and looking at things than Homer ever seems to. um, yeah, whatever.
He'd be fulfilling his daily step goal.
Right. All else being equal, like look, he can. There's the episode where he's promoted to management, and he's being given credit for like increasing for for there being like fewer accidents, and Mr. Smithers like, oh, but this is actually the exact same number of accidents that last year Homer himself is known or suspected to have caused. So, uh, yeah. So yeah, they could just like have really, they could just capture all this with, they could just capture the productivity gains with it, I mean, if they're happy with their level of consumption with increased free time. Um, and so that's how it could work, right, under a better system. And we can kind of extend the thought here, right, to like even some of these like things that's like a lot of the grunt work, I mean, a lot of I mean, it's intellectual grunt work, but it is grunt work nonetheless that doctors and lawyers do, which, in terms of like looking up precedents, looking up relevant case law, or like basically just like, looking up or remembering, like the which symptoms, go with which like are indicative of which diseases, and that sort of thing. Like, look, right now, the idea that like a lot of these doctor and lawyer jobs could be automated away sounds horrible to a lot of people, because becoming a doctor or a lawyer, like these are such wonderful exit ramps from the working class, right?
Mm.
That these are such valued ways of getting some upward mobility in life. That you can you
Right,
study
and one
hard.
reason that you might employ George Jetson to press the one button, even though you don't need to, is if the job is a sinecure, or however you pronounce that, as in it's a
Yeah,
job you give
yeah,
your nephew.
yeah, exactly, right. Yeah,
Just because
yeah.
your profits are so excessive and you have some human aspect to you, you may still hire, you know, relatives and friends and family to do such research. But this is, a complete return to feudal nepotism.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right. I think that's probably the best explanation. Like, that would be that would actually be hilarious if they ever did a reboot and they like threw that as an explanation. It's like, oh no, it's the Jetsons are actually like a brand. They're like actually
Yeah,
closely enough related to the Spacely family that they throw them
yeah.
the meaningless job.
Yeah, but he's not an impressive nephew in any way, which is why he has the button job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's not a like they don't care about it enough to put him in management or anything like this. It's just like, oh, whatever. Let idiot cousin George have the button job. Yeah, that could work. But it's like, look, yeah, under capitalism, these kind of like PMC jobs are important as means of upward mobility. So you can like go to school, study hard, climb the ladder, get a better life, right? But like under a better social system, right, where we just had a better life for everybody, then it could be that it's like, look, to the I mean, even if, however optimistic your projections are about the withering away of the state or whatever, like I mean, I do strongly suspect that there's no realistic scenario where we don't have lawyers. Certainly, we all love doctors, but like, if the sort of boring bits of those jobs can be automated away, then fine, sure, no problem, right? And certainly, something like where I start the essay with talking about thinking about auto factories, like why I was bringing that dude up, um, is because like I used to have all these conversations with him about how like soul deadeningly boring working at that plant was, right? And certainly, I think about like growing up in mid Michigan, members of my family who had at one time or another worked those jobs and like had you know industrial accidents and whatever, right? It's like this is like there's nothing that's like there's no intrinsic human value to cars being made by humans, right? Like it's like the reason that under capitalism, in a relative sense, it's good for cars to be made by humans is that that's a way for like a human to get like a good union job, right? But like all else being equal, if we're abstracted away from the social system, It's like, yeah, there's no intrinsic human value to humans doing that. I mean, it's like there's intrinsic value to having cars, right? That we can use them to, get around. Um, but there's no intrinsic value to the cars being made by humans if we can automate that away, if we have a social system where automation doesn't destroy people's livelihoods. And similarly, even these like PMC, like more intellectual jobs, um, to the extent that it's like, look, there's no, I don't know that there's any terrible innate human value to like, humans sitting around all day looking up case law and precedents, right? There's, if that can be automated away again without destroying, what right now is like a sort of precious, life raft of upward mobility. Um, but there are other things I think that humans do that there is like innate value in a human doing that thing, right? So the example that I start with at the beginning of the
Is the things me and you do.
yeah, yeah, basically, right? That's the yes, like the AI assistant. I have a conflict of interest here, but like yes, but like, look, I think that like when you know AI, I mean, I start out the essay by quoting or the talk, by quoting the bit in chapter 7 where Marx talks about how the difference, like the sort of intricacy of honeycombs can put can put the work of human architects to shame, but the difference between the worst of human architects and the best of bees is that the architect makes the building in his head before he makes it in physical reality.
Yeah, and that leads to us being able to make a billion buildings and then to make the same honeycomb over and 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 over again.
Yeah, yeah, not the bees don't the bees don't have
They don't. There's not brutalist honeycombs.
exactly, yes. Yeah, so it's like and it's like, and it says, of course, the further they, and he talks a bit in this passage about the ways that the ways that the mind and the body interact in human labor, and how the more sort of distant what you're doing is from your interests, the more like strain is puts on you. So of course, yes, which is why, of course, like people are tempted to use it for all this other stuff, but it's like, yeah, to the extent that you're not like, they're like writing like a student paper, that's like maybe the perfect example in some ways, because like the point of students writing papers is not at all the actual production of papers, right? The
Right.
paper,
They're all instantly thrown away and deleted by everyone involved.
yeah, the paper existed is not like a human good in itself, right? It's like that's like, we just, where would human civilization be if we didn't have all these intro to philosophy papers, right? Like it's not yes, as you said, nobody preserves them once the semester is over. Why would you, right? That the I mean, if you wrote a particularly amazing paper, then maybe, right, that you hold on to that and turn that into something or whatever. But it's like, by and large, right, there's like neither student nor professor or TA or whoever like has any reason whatsoever to hold on to these, right? The existence of the paper is not the point of writing the paper, in the way that the existence of the car is the point of producing a car, right? The point of producing the paper is the things that you have to do in order to write the paper, that you have to learn the material so you can and like understand it well enough that you can convey it in your own words. You have to, so you have to do this research, you have to figure out how to frame your argument, and like that which will teach you how to reason, right? Like these are the things that the writing of the paper is for. And of course, if you just let your swarm of AI bees construct your paper honeycomb, then it's like the entire exercise is like almost literally pointless. Like, I mean, the only,
Right. I mean, you don't graduate with any qualities and skills apart from AI prompt writer, and I suspect even in the case, like they probably wouldn't be very even good at that because
Yeah,
they aren't trying to produce some, like they're not like interested in working with the AI system itself. They're not even
yeah,
interested in that. They're just using it as a direct means to an end.
right. I don't know. I mean, all they ever did was feed prompts into it, right? I don't know. Like, yeah, they didn't even come up with the yeah, right, exactly. So it's not. It's like at that point, like, look, it really would be like simpler to just like I mean, because yeah, you could imagine, I suppose, right? Everybody's using the AI to write it, and then on the other end, I mean, fair is fair, right? If like set some grading AIs to work grading them, and they can communicate with each other. But this also seems like a lot of unnecessary steps, right? I mean, at that point, you might as well just have middle class parents, directly pay the university for the degree and just award it to the lucky child on his 18th birthday and call it a day, right? No need for classes and all that, right?
Which again, very very return.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So, even when you start thinking about things like the screenwriting example, it's like, there is, I think, I mean, look, this depends on how you think about what art is and why it's valuable. And these are all very debatable topics, right? But I think that it's in like leaching intentionality out of the process, right? You are destroying most of the point, right? And and I think that if we're creating art, like bees and not like human architects, right? It's one, for all the reasons we talked about earlier, it's a recipe for extremely shitty products at the end of the day, right? But like it's also just, I think plausibly there is just, like learning to reason and all this other stuff. I think creating art, plausibly has innate human value, right? Like that's an intrinsically valuable, human activity, right? And it's, if you take the intentionality out, right? I mean, it's which I mean, I'll admit, sort of morally offends me, maybe like to a degree that like I have or I don't know, pseudo morally, aesthetically, something, right? In some way or another, like offends me on a level that like I have I often feel like I struggle to convey when I'm talking to people who don't share my intuition about this, right? But it just seems revolting to me to like expect other people to read something that you couldn't be bothered to write yourself,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite fun to make AI art and to make.
Sure.
I don't like the tech stuff, but it is like relating to then show it to the people is like telling someone about your dream.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that there's like, if it's like, look, I mean, if you treat it essentially as a toy, right?
Right, it's a really fun toy, but
Yeah,
people, the capitalist class, wanted to make it the center of our society.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, in my stream, atheist Donnie Gugor asked, "What is my shirt?" This is the Psycho. So, um, went to last night, and I went to Tijuana with Jason, and there's this place, Nuclear Waste, Nuclear Fallout. It's one of those. I think it's Nuclear Waste is what it's called. That's which is a shop that sells all kinds um, of uh, of movie and like horror movie and mostly metal, but all other kinds of music T-shirts, which I don't want to get them in trouble here. I suspect that intellectual property law is not
May
rigorously
not be
enforced.
licensed.
Yes. May or may not be licensed, but very reasonable prices. That's so. So yeah, I was always end up leaving that place with like five of these things.
um,
But
I
but
thought
yeah,
you were
look.
going to say.
So I think that we can again go back to the original thing, right? That's like I think that ideally, right, if we're not sort of totally under the thumb of the blind power of market forces on this, um, all of this could work out in a reasonable way that we can, that we can say, um, as a society, right, that the things that, like, there's no particular innate value towards, like, that, the only value is that somebody has a job, right? Well, look, we can just provide everybody with a good livelihood, and those things that are just like annoying and pointless except as a source of income, if there's a way to automate it, we can just automate them away, and all be much better off for it. And then we can also, we could also make collective decisions. And I mean, this is obviously fraught. This is, political, right? But it's like we can make collective decisions about which activities have actual value, and, like, that humans doing it has actual value, and those things can be done by humans. So I mean, I sort of playfully, but I also kind of mean it, right? Like, at the end, say, like, look, I would love it if the future was, like, on the one hand, like, fully automated luxury communism, that, like, it is certain, from a certain perspective, goddamn near everything has been automated. But, like, also there were some things that, because we decided as a culture, like, they have tremendous value, that, like, if you were caught using the AI workarounds, like, you would more or less be expected to commit ritual suicide because the shame of it, right?
Yeah, like if you didn't say that, this is just a silly thing the AI made for me.
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
try to
yeah.
pass it off as your
But you're
own.
trying to pass it off as your
Yeah,
own,
yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, so I don't know how many more of these we're doing before take the usual winter break,
Oh
but
yeah, Christmas. I was gonna say, do Americans have advent calendars? I mean, you're
yes.
Jewish, so how would you know? But
Uh, oh, part Jewish, secular, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we have yes, Americans do know about advent calendars.
are they like ubiquitous?
They're
Ubiquitous?
not ubiquitous, but it's not like, like, I don't think anybody would be like, oh, what's that, right? Or I don't know, maybe some people would, but I think it's like, they're
Yeah, because
not ubiquitous.
I
Yeah.
bought them all for my flatmates and gave them to a Nigerian and an Indian, and they had no idea what they were.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think interesting. Yeah.
And they're both Christians, to be clear.
That's funny. Yeah. Yeah. I think that uh, I think that, yeah, I think the advent calendar has, like, a reasonable degree of penetration here. But
I think
uh,
they're about 1% of the UK winter economy.
yeah, yeah, it's probably less, but it's like, again, it's not unknown.
Yeah.
The I did actually see. Did you ever read any of the Jean Le Carre spy novels? The George
I don't
Smiley.
think so.
Okay, yeah. There's a well, I won't do the joke here, but but anybody who has, there's a funny cartoon that somebody put together. There's the John Le Carre spy calendar, or, John Le Carre advent calendar. So it's like, you know day December 1st through December 23rd. George Smiley grimly goes around London, feeling conflicted about what he's doing, and investigating clues. Uh, December 24th, Smiley's, having completed, his mission, Smiley has Christmas alone in his apartment, while writing his letter of resignation. So, uh,
Um, so I've been proposing that we do a tier list
yeah,
Sunday.
I think that would be a fun way to close it out for
But I was going to
the.
say, if we could do that probably the last week before we break,
Yeah, sounds good.
which I don't
Well,
know. So
yeah,
we're going, obviously, today's the first, so 8, 15, 22nd, 29.
yeah, make a firm decision sometime in the next few days about whether that's going to be next Sunday, the Sunday
But
after.
regardless of this podcast, what are you writing this week, Benjamin?
Well, Stefan, I am. I had a few things in the in. I had a few things in the hamper before this. Like I've just kind of the last few weeks. Yeah, there was one Sunday I just couldn't technologically get it together to do one, and the other two I've just done the talks that I gave when I was in London. But I think
Oh, right, yes, I guess you haven't actually done one in a while.
yeah, exactly. So I haven't done like a normal one in a little while, right? Like the last. Now I do have one other talk that I did in London, but I don't think that one would make as good a Substack as these last two. So I'm probably not going to try to adapt it into that. So I think the thing that I was working on before that was was about uh, was about Hegel's was about like uh, Cohen's reconstruction of like Hegel's arguments about the theory of history. And so if I can like why like some of these sort of strange like arguments that Hegel makes about like the world spirit and stuff like that. So I thought if I could
He means that the world is a big ghost. If I've learned anything from people asking questions on r slash ask philosophy, what he means is that the world is a big ghost.
yeah, there you go. Solved. All right, well I can
Um,
skip that one now. But yes, it was going to be on Hegel's theory of history. We'll see.
for the tier list, what I did was I took the top 30 influential philosophers from the Phil's paper survey, but then I just scrolled down your Substack and grabbed all the names that weren't there.
Nice.
Though I
I
think
like
at least a fair few of them would be names that would be on that list in of the fact and weren't in of the fact that they've died in between 2021 and 2024.
yeah, fair.
So like Dennett wasn't on that list because he was alive at the time, but presumably I
Right.
think would now rank very highly.
Right. Yeah. That seems right. Fair enough.
Bye everyone.